What do you do when the man you married for 18 years turns your dad's death into a payday? 3 days after my dad died, I walked into my own kitchen at 11 in the morning and found my husband in sweatpants with a legal pad, doing math on my inheritance before I'd even had the chance to grieve. If you've ever had someone rewrite your future without asking you a single question, stay with me. Hit subscribe because by the end of this you'll understand exactly why staying quiet isn't the same thing as staying weak. My name is Renee Ashby. I'm 42 years old, and this is the story of how my dad's last gift to me wasn't money. It was time, enough time to finally see my marriage clearly for the first time in 18 years. 3 days after my dad died, I stood in my kitchen doorway, coat still on, staring at my husband like a stranger had let himself in. "Derek, why are you home?" He didn't even look up. "Morning, Renee. It's Friday." I know what day it is. For a second I thought he'd taken bereavement leave. Dad's funeral wasn't until Monday, and I'd spent the whole morning arguing with a florist about an arrangement called Eternal Peace, the kind of name my dad, a man who once returned a couch over the throw pillows, would have hated. Then I noticed his company badge wasn't clipped to his bag where it always sat. Did something happen at the office? He closed the laptop. I put in my resignation. I turned around like there might be a second husband who could explain the one at my table. "You did what?" "I resigned, Renee. Wednesday." Wednesday. The day after I'd called him sobbing from a hospital parking garage to tell him my dad was gone. "You quit a stable job the day after my dad died?" He leaned back, unbothered. "I don't see the point in grinding through another 10 years of this." He studied me, then said it like he was announcing we didn't need cable anymore. "Why keep working 40 hours a week when your inheritance is enough for both of us?" I just stood there. My dad had been dead 72 hours. His last voicemail was still saved on my phone because I couldn't make myself delete it. Sympathy cards were stacked on the counter behind Derek. And my husband had apparently already retired off a death I hadn't even processed. What inheritance? Come on. Your dad sold Colston Packaging for millions. The house is paid off. What do you think you're getting? I don't know the exact number, Derek. Do you? He hesitated. Even conservatively, it's got to be 4 million easy. Conservatively. He'd done math. I hadn't. I knew my dad was comfortable, and that he'd sold his company 7 years earlier. What I didn't know was that my husband had apparently been running numbers on my inheritance while I was still picking out a burial suit. That evening, Derek's mom and sister came over with a casserole, and for 20 minutes everything felt almost bearable. Then Derek started spending my dad's money out loud. Carol was midway through complaining about her rent increase when Derek said, "Mom, stop worrying. Once things settle, I'm buying you a place." "Derek, honey, I couldn't." "You're not asking." "I'm telling you." A beat later. "There are some nice condo developments out past Novi." Tracy smiled into her wine glass. "Look at Mom, she's already picked a zip code." Derek turned to Tracy next, like he was working down a checklist. "And we'll get you squared away too. The credit card stuff, the consolidation loan, I'll give you $210,000. Clean slate." Tracy stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor and hugged him. I sat there holding my water glass, watching my husband distribute an estate that wasn't even settled yet. Nobody had asked how I was holding up. Nobody had asked what I wanted to do with any of it. "Derek, my dad hasn't even been buried yet." Table went silent. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "Taking care of family." "Whose family?" I said, because it sounds like you're spending mine. Derek's jaw tightened. He told me I was being unnecessary. I told him a $210,000 promise nobody asked me about was more unnecessary than my tone. After they left, he followed me into the kitchen and said I'd embarrassed his mom. I told him none of that money existed yet, not legally, not really. He said we were married, which apparently meant there was no longer a my money and his money. Just money. Our money. I didn't argue that night. Some tired part of me was already deciding whether this fight was worth having. I'd think about that decision differently by the end of the week. The next morning, my phone rang while I stood in my dad's closet, deciding which suit he'd have hated the least. "Renee, it's Arthur Bell. Your dad's attorney. We traded condolences. There were estate documents he wanted to walk through with me. Could I come in tomorrow?" "Of course. Derek can come with us." "Actually, your dad specifically asked that our first conversation be with you alone." I glanced toward the living room where Derek was scrolling a used pontoon boat listing. For the first time since my dad died, I wondered what he had known that I didn't. If you're getting the sense that Raymond Colston saw something coming a long time before any of us did, stick around because this is where the story really turns. Arthur's office was on the third floor of an old brick building downtown. I'd been there twice before, once when my mom died, once when my dad sold the company. He closed a folder in front of him. "Before we get into numbers, there's something your dad wanted me to raise directly. Did Derek ever mention he came to see your dad alone? Around 14 months ago? Alone? No. Never. He came by in person once. A follow-up call and later an email about your dad's estate. My husband discussed my inheritance with my dying dad. Without me. He wasn't doing anything illegal," Arthur said carefully. "Your dad wanted me to be clear about that. Somehow that made it worse." Arthur slid across a photocopy of a letter in my dad's blocky, all-capital handwriting. "He authorized me to give you this after he passed." I read it. My dad described an afternoon Derek stopped by, ostensibly to talk about retirement. Then one line stopped me cold, written down almost word for word. Derek said, "Once Renee inherits, I can finally stop grinding it out." I told him that's Renee's decision. He laughed and said, "Raymond, we're married. What's hers is mine eventually anyway." That bothered him, I said. "Very much. But I want you to see the rest first. After gifts and estate costs, the assets designated for you total approximately $4.3 million, not including the house." I don't remember reacting dramatically. Mostly I remember thinking Derek hadn't been far off, and hating that thought. "There's a structure to how you'll receive it," Arthur continued. "The majority sits in a trust your dad set up. For the first 5 years, any large gift or distribution needs sign-off from an independent trustee. A big gift to a relative would qualify. Several $100,000 into someone else's debt would too. So my dad put a stranger between me and my own money because of my husband. He was worried about pressure. But not about you, about the position you might get talked into. I'm 42. I'm not a child. He knew that." Arthur turned to the letter's second page. "I won't leave Renee my opinion of her husband along with my money. That's not mine to decide for her." I reached for a tissue I'd been so sure I wouldn't need. "He didn't want you spending his last months defending Derek to him," Arthur said quietly. "He just didn't want anyone able to rush you into a decision about the money. If you've ever had someone protect you from a truth you weren't ready to see yourself, hang on, because next is exactly how far ahead of me my husband had already planned." When I got home, Derek was showered and dressed, which briefly made me feel better, until his first sentence. "So? What did Belle say?" "There's a trust." "How much?" "Because my dad died 5 days ago, Derek, and I haven't even buried him yet. I'm not discussing numbers today." He laughed, short and humorless, when I explained the trustee approval requirement. "So we need someone else's permission to touch our own money." "It's not our money yet. I already resigned. I need to know what we're working with. Not I made a mistake. Not I should have talked to you first. Just, I already resigned, like his decision was an invoice I now owed." That night I couldn't sleep. Around 1 in the morning I heard Derek's voice in the den. "No, don't panic. The money's real, it's just tied up right now. Tracy, I'll figure it out." Then, quieter, "Renee will come around. She always does. I stood on the staircase in the dark. Normally, I'd have walked in and demanded an explanation. Instead, for the first time in 18 years, I went back upstairs. I wanted to hear what he said when he thought I wasn't listening. The next morning, I asked what else he'd promised. Not angrily, which unsettled him more than shouting would have. Besides the condo for your mom and the $210,000 for Tracy, what else is on the list? There was a lake place on Higgins Lake. He wanted to invest enough that we'd never touch the principal, help his mom, help Tracy spend February somewhere warm. None of it sounded monstrous alone. Problem was that Derek had built an entire future for both of us without once asking if I wanted to live inside it. When did you actually resign? The real date. He looked at the window. Wednesday morning. My dad died Tuesday night. That's the morning after. We'd already been talking about it. Before your dad passed. You were planning your exit while he was still alive. I was talking about options. Don't make this ugly. You're making it sound like I was waiting for him to die, he said. Were you? I asked. No. The answer came fast enough that I believed it. Then, but he was 75, Renee. We all knew where it was headed. When exactly did my dad's estate become your retirement plan? He grabbed his keys and said he couldn't talk to me like this. I let him go. If you want to see exactly how far back this goes, make sure you're subscribed because the next thing I found changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Over the next several days, I found out how far Derek's plans had traveled. An email from a real estate agent thanked us for our interest in the lake property. Derek had put down a refundable $6,500 deposit without mentioning it. Carol told her landlord she wouldn't renew her lease. Tracy said Derek had told her not to lock into a repayment plan since she'd soon be able to settle everything outright. Derek hadn't just made promises. People had started restructuring their lives around them. You told your sister to stop negotiating her own debt. I told her not to lock into something stupid. You rearranged other people's actual lives, Derek. We do have it. I have it, I said. There's a difference. There it is. Your money. Yours. You've never talked like this in 18 years. Because you've never had $4 million from your dead dad between us before. The next morning I called Arthur. Was that the only time Derek talked to my dad about the estate? Pause too long to be nothing. No. I went back downtown. Arthur slid across several pages. The header read, Ashby Colston Family Investment Plan. I laughed once involuntarily. My husband had given my dad's death a project title. Estimated returns. The lake property. Housing for Carol. Tracy, debt resolution $210,000. A full page of retirement projections for Derek. My dad's estate value appeared 3 times. So did my name, Renee's expected inheritance, Renee's projected assets, Renee's anticipated distribution income. The date in the corner, 14 months before my dad died. Not grief. Not some impulsive decision after a funeral. 14 months. My dad was still driving himself to Home Depot, calling every Sunday to ask if I'd rotated my tires, while my husband quietly drafted a retirement plan funded by his death. There's nothing here about what I wanted, I said. I'm in this document 14 times and I'm not in it at all. That evening Derek asked if I'd talked to the trustee. I'm not requesting any distributions. Not for your mom. Not for Tracy. Not for the lake. For the first time since my dad died, Derek didn't look irritated. He looked scared. He'd never actually believed I would say no. The next morning, I overheard Derek asking his old manager whether the resignation could be reversed. They already offered my territory to Nolan, he said when he hung up. He'd complained about Nolan for 6 years. Derek wanted me to request enough from the trust to replace 2 years of his salary. I said no, I wasn't cutting off the mortgage, I had my own income, but I wouldn't turn my dad's estate into severance for a resignation I hadn't known about. Carol and Tracy came over to talk, which is a word families use for anything but gentle. Derek told us you're not requesting distributions, Tracy said. That's right. I wish I'd known before I changed things with my creditors. Derek told you to. Not me. Carol stepped in. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. That phrase again, apparently declining to fund other people's lives, was what made things ugly, never the decisions that put me there. I didn't hate Carol even then. She'd driven me to the hospital when Hannah was born because Derek was 2 states away on a sales trip. People are inconvenient that way. They can hurt you without erasing every good thing they've done. After they left, I caught myself thinking about a condo, not the one Derek promised, just something modest Carol could manage alone. Arthur said it would run about $240,000. Then he asked one question. Is this what you want, Renee, or what keeps the peace? I didn't have an answer, so I submitted nothing. Good thing Carol showed up the next afternoon. Derek said you might be reconsidering the condo. I hadn't mentioned a condo to her. Your dad left you over $4 million, she said. What are you saving it for? I told her to keep her current lease and she left without another word. Hannah called that night. Dad said you're talking about lawyers and separate accounts. Are you seriously going to end 18 years over money? I'm not choosing between you and your dad. Then what are you doing? Figuring out when being married to me turned into permission to stop asking me anything. That night Derek said we couldn't wall off $4 million and act like it had nothing to do with him. I laid it out piece by piece, the job, the house, the $210,000, the retirement drafted 14 months before my dad died, all without asking me once. He had no answer. I picked up my pillow for the guest room. He asked how long. I didn't rush to tell him. Derek moved into the guest room. Our marriage turned coldly polite. Need anything from the store, taking the dog out, I'll be late interview. But he did start changing things. He canceled the lake deposit, updated his resume, called old contacts, trying to explain to prospective employers why a 46-year-old man had abruptly walked away from a stable job. About 3 weeks in, my dad's old business partner, Frank Delgado, called to check in. He'd co-owned Colston Packaging with my dad for almost 20 years. I probably shouldn't say this, Frank said, but your dad called me a little over a year before he passed, pretty rattled. Said Derek had come by asking pointed questions about how the sale was structured, trusts, payout timing. Your dad brushed it off at the time. He never mentioned it to me. I don't think he wanted to put you in the middle of it. He asked me, half joking, whether a man could love somebody and still be planning around their death. I didn't have a good answer then. I'm not sure I do now. Confirmed what the document already told me. This hadn't started the week my dad died. It had been building for over a year in conversations I was never part of. A few days later I heard Derek on the phone with Tracy. It wasn't mine to promise. It was never mine. A pause. No, Renee didn't talk me out of it. I talked myself into something I had no right to. A few days after that, he told his mom the same thing. When he hung up, I said, "Thank you." He looked surprised. "For not making me the villain," he said. I told him he'd done that part himself already. It was probably the closest we'd come to tenderness in a month, which made what came next so much harder. The following Sunday, I asked Derek to sit at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd promised his mom a condo and his sister $210,000 while my dad's funeral flowers were still wilting in the living room. I put the 6 pages between us. He read the header, Ashby Colston Family Investment Plan, and didn't ask where I'd gotten it, which told me everything. You sent this to my dad. 14 months before he died. He said nothing. Your retirement projection. The lake house. Your mom's condo. $210,000 for Tracy. I looked up. Whose money is this? We've done this already. No, we haven't. Show me where you asked what I wanted. He didn't touch the pages, so I did it for him. My name is in here 14 times. Renee's expected inheritance. Renee's projected assets. I set them down. Where am I, Derek? Not my number. Me. That line hit you the way it hit him. Smash that like button right now, because this is the moment everything between us actually changed. He looked down for a long time. I know that's not an excuse. I was tired, Renee. I've been doing the same job for 24 years. Your dad sold his company for a fortune and never had to think about a paycheck again. He never held that over you. I know he didn't. The answer came so fast I believed it, which made it worse. You wanted to feel like him, I said. Maybe. And you were going to use my dad's money to get there. He closed his eyes and didn't argue. Something in me settled. Not triumph, just understanding, and it made me sadder, not lighter. Derek hadn't spent 14 months plotting to rob me. He'd built a story where my inheritance quietly solved every disappointment in his own life, and somewhere along the way he'd stopped noticing I was a person in that story, not a line item. Hannah stopped by and saw the folder. You wrote this before Grandpa died. Yes. 14 months before. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. For the first time, she understood what she'd been quietly asking me to overlook. Derek apologized, really apologized, without an excuse trailing behind it. Sorry for turning my dad's death into a financial event before I'd had a chance to grieve. Sorry for making promises on my behalf. I believed him. I also told him something I wish I'd understood years earlier. A person becoming better doesn't obligate you to go back to being the version of yourself who had to be hurt before they changed. Derek moved out the following Saturday. No scene, no thrown suitcases. Call me if anything comes up with the house, he said, keys in hand. 18 years and goodbye still felt too formal for either of us. The months after weren't as satisfying as people imagine this kind of ending feels. I missed him more than I expected. His key in the door, the ridiculous way he sneezed like a starting pistol going off. Missing someone doesn't mean you were wrong to let them go. Derek found another job after 7 weeks, one that paid less. Not exactly the retirement I had planned, he said with a crooked, honest smile. Nobody's fault but yours, I told him. Carol renewed her lease and negotiated a smaller increase herself. Tracy took a full-time job at a design firm and started paying down her debt the ordinary way. Nobody ended up destitute. Catastrophe everyone had been so certain I was about to cause turned out to be mostly just an ordinary life. Before you go, if you've ever had to decide between keeping the peace and keeping your own name on your own life, tell me in the comments where you landed, because a lot of us are still figuring that one out. Derek and I started counseling separately first, then together. Comfortable mostly. Our counselor once asked him why he'd been so sure I'd eventually go along with everything. Because she always came around, he said. I usually gave in, I corrected him. He didn't argue. We finalized the divorce a few months later. Around that time, Hannah and I cleared out my dad's house. He'd owned 4 tape measures because he didn't trust the one in the garage anymore on principle after it lied to him once. We laughed, the first real laugh either of us had had in that house since he died. There was no dramatic hidden letter waiting in a drawer. Just hardware store receipts and measurements scratched on an old envelope for shelves he never built. My dad hadn't known my marriage better than I did. He'd simply noticed something that troubled him, and built in enough time that I wouldn't have to decide anything under pressure. That turned out to be exactly enough. I didn't do anything dramatic with the money. I strengthened my retirement accounts, kept most of it invested, set up an education fund for any grandchildren I might have one day, and donated to the community college scholarship my dad had quietly funded for years without telling anyone. Eventually, I helped Hannah cover her first year of out-of-state tuition, only after we talked through what it meant, no strings attached. That conversation took 20 minutes. may have been the healthiest financial decision anyone in my family made all year. When Derek and I signed the last paperwork, we got coffee after, which probably sounds strange. 18 years doesn't disappear just because lawyers put sticky tabs on documents. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd just stayed at my job? Maybe we'd still be married, I said. But the real problem would still be there underneath it. You thought marrying me meant you owned things that were never yours to own. The money just made it expensive enough for me to notice. I wish I'd noticed first. So do I. We finished our coffee, hugged once in the parking lot, and drove to separate cars. For a long time, I thought my dad's final gift was $4.3 million. It wasn't. The most valuable thing he left me was time, because without that trust, I know exactly what would have happened. Derek would have apologized, Carol would have cried, Tracy would have explained how badly she needed it, and I would have told myself there was plenty to go around because somewhere along the way I'd confused keeping everyone comfortable with being a good wife. 3 days after my dad died, I found out my husband had already quit his job because he believed my inheritance meant neither of us would ever have to work again. He was wrong. Derek went back to work. And in a strange way, so did I, except the job I finally walked away from was one I'd been working for 18 years without ever clocking in, smoothing things over, giving in, and calling it peace when it was really just permission. If you've ever had to learn the difference between the two, you already know why it took me this long. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.